Everybody, I want to talk a little bit about one of my favorite bands growing up, and that is Mott the Hoople. I've got a couple Mott the Hoople albums. In fact, I'm pretty sure I have all the young dudes back there, which is sort of a gem. I should look for it harder, but I've got these four that I had out. Uh, and I wanted to talk a little bit about Mott the Hoople, one of the quintessential glam rock bands, maybe a forerunner of punk rock, even in some ways, even though they don't really seem like the same thing, but in some ways they kind of connect. And just a terrific band, Mott the Hoople, one of my favorite bands. So I hope you'll consider watching. I never saw Mott the Hoople. Just a little bit of a story. I had a friend with an older brother. Now, you've heard me mention a lot of the music I was introduced to came from my friends who had older siblings. I had a younger sibling, so I actually learned about from my younger sibling, people like Tony DeFranco and Donny Osmond, which was great. But some of my other friends had older siblings, and they were playing like Mott the Hoople, Pink Floyd, and back in those days, that was pretty exciting. Not stuff you heard all the time. But I used to go over to his house. I remember the year because of the time in my life. It was the summer of 1975. And his older brother had a super duper good album collection and a really great stereo. And I remember listening to Living in the Past. And this guy would kind of explain, oh, this is Jethro Tull, and he'd kind of tell me who they were. But at one time during that summer, he played this album for me, Mott the Hoople, and which is the 1974 album, Mott the Hoople, The Hoople. And I remember he told me, now, you might not like this guy's voice at first, but it kind of grows on you, and the band's really good. And, of course, these are like two 14-year-olds talking to each other, so what do we know? But he put on marionettes. And that was great, and you hear, and I remember thinking, yeah, Ian Hunter, he doesn't have like a Karen Carpenter, Roger Daltrey, great voice, but it was a voice that kind of grew on you, and I think that's because he's an expressive singer, and he has great lyrics and concepts, and the band was great, and they wrote great songs, and of course, so ultimately was a great singer, wasn't he? I actually got to see Ian Hunter in 1979, warming up for the Kinks, and I remember they did a couple Mott the Hoople songs. You know what? Mick Ralphs might have even been at that concert. I don't know. Doesn't Mick Ralphs kind of play with Ian Hunter once in a while? But I know they did All the Young Dudes, and then the Kinks came out. Maybe one of the best concerts I've ever seen. And if you think about it, Ian Hunter and the Kinks, that's a really good pairing for a show, British, kind of roughly of that period. In fact, I should talk about the Kinks sometimes because you have like the 60s Kinks and the 70s Kinks. And I kind of grew up with the 70s Kinks, all the Stadium Rocker Kinks, and they were great. But anyway, he played this album for me, and then he made a cassette tape. Now, I had at that time a little desk office cassette player, and this would be 1975, and cassettes were still kind of new. In fact, my sister and I still, I think, had a little reel-to-reel that we used to make little silly, radio programs on this little reel-to-reel and things. And then the cassette came out. We had just a little like desktop cassette. But my friend's older brother had a really high-end stereo cassette deck. And I don't even think stereo cassette decks were that much of a thing in 1975. But this guy had one. And he recorded on a cassette for me with whatever the good audio quality of that time was. I never was too nuts about cassettes. I don't think I bought many. But they were kind of practically useful. But he put on the Golden Age of Rock and Roll, Marionettes, and Alice. And for years, those were the three main Mott the Hoople songs I knew. Now, later on in high school, I bought this album. So, in fact, I think it might be another one of those records I got from the Columbia House Record Club later on. But anyway, at some point in high school, I ended up buying the album. So this is the album I probably know the best of Mott the Hoople. It's got Roll Away the Stone, Crash Street Kids, Born Late 58, Pearl and Roy. Crash Street Kids are coming to get you. Better run, better run, better run. Crash street kids are coming to get you. Now you're done. Now you're done. Now you're done. At the end, crash street kids are coming to get you. Now you're dead. Now you're dead. Now you're dead. And they have those machine guns. And I remember listening to that loud through those machine guns come on, and it would really startle you, you know. But this is a fantastic album. Alice is such a good song. It's about a hooker in New York. And one of the great things about Alice, it's kind of a street ballad, if you will, but it's got that really kind of that's a really good, if you want to like listen to a specimen of glam rock, Alice off this album is really good. And another good thing about Alice is it's got a great organ in it. And I miss organ playing in rock music, like probably a B3 or something like that. Just super duper good. And those organs really added an element to a lot of the music in that period. You know, Three Dog Night had a great organ player, didn't they? You know, and did a lot of great stuff with organ. And I kind of miss hearing organs in music. Of course, the Allman Brothers have organ, but this was kind of upbeat organ. And Alice is, but it's kind of a rocker. It feels kind of like Diamond Dogs or one of those Bowie songs. It's kind of a boogie Bowie, but it was never boogie like, you know, shake, rattle, and roll, or you know, a whole lot of shaking going on boogie, but it was kind of a boogie feel, but it had all these great lyrics and a kind of glam vibe, kind of like some of those Bowie boogies that were just great changes. But this is a fantastic album. Now later on, I bought this one. This is actually a copy I picked up more recently. I don't know what happened to my copy. You know, a lot of albums I had growing up I've lost, and I've replaced them. But this is Mott the Hoople's greatest hits. And I bought this. This might have been one of the later vinyl albums I ever bought, you know, because after a while I kind of stopped buying vinyl records, both because I think vinyl was being phased out, and also, you know, I was going into a time of life where I didn't sit around and listen to a lot of vinyl records. But I did buy this one at some point. I guess I'd be around 19 or 20, and this is Mott the Hoople's greatest hits, and it's a really good album. It had several of those tracks from the Hoople on it, but it also had Ballad of Mott, All the Way from Memphis. All the Way from Memphis is a really good song. Ian Hunter plays piano on that, and that's good because it's that good old rock and roll piano, kind of that boogie rock and roll piano. But he actually was for the Hoople, they brought in a guy named Morgan Fisher. He's the guy you always see with this keyboard. Where is he? He's always got that keyboard tuxedo with the piano keys on it. And he was great too. But Ian Hunter plays a pretty good piano. If you listen All the Way from Memphis, that's Ian Hunter. So of course, this has all the young dudes on it, and Honolulu Boogie. And it has several songs from this album on it. Now, this album I never really listened to much, although several of the songs from it were on their greatest hits. But I think this is considered, this was a 1973 album, Mott the Hoople, Mott. And then this album is Mott the Hoople. So you have Mott the Hoople, Mott, and Mott the Hoople. I think this might be considered their more successful album. And this one was the last album Mick Ralphs was on, you know, from Bad Company. Mick Ralphs was the guitar player in Mott the Hoople for years, and then left to go join Bad Company. But this was the last album Mick Ralphs was on. And it's a really good album. But, you know, I actually didn't grow up listening to this one. I listened to the Hoople a lot more. I want to say a little bit about that. Mick Ralphs left to join Mott the Hoople, and I think this album was like their fifth or sixth album. All the Young Dudes was the album that preceded it, but even All the Young Dudes, I think they don't, as iconic as that particular song became, I don't think they were all that satisfied with All the Young Dudes, and that's like 4 or 5 albums in. And what I find kind of interesting is, you know, we talked today about the newer music and how record companies don't let artists develop. You know, Mott the Hoople had 4 or 5 albums that I think were kind of flops, and not only commercially, but I think musically they weren't well received, and I don't think the band liked them. And the reason the record company kept them going because they knew Mott the Hoople was a great band and they had great live shows. And I was thinking about that a little bit because I think that's one of the things that would trip up a lot of bands, and if you think about it, that's something that can affect the trajectory of a band's career or artist's career. Because a lot of times you have this great music in a club or a bar, or playing in a coffee house or whatever, or church, wherever you happen to be playing, and it's really hard to take that artistry of the performance and translate that into a studio setting. I think that's one of the things that trips up a lot of albums. Even the Beatles, Keith Richards said the Beatles don't sound that good. I think I bet Beatles in the Cavern playing Day Tripper, some of those early songs sounded a lot different than on those records. And, Charlie Daniels, I heard him say that once. He did like 5 albums and they all stunk. And here they were a great band. They'd go in the studio and play the same songs that they played great, 5 nights a week or whatever. And they'd go in the studio and everything would turn out stinky. And there's an art to the studio. And I also think a lot of times engineers and producers, they sort of kill the spirit of a band. They try to, they're focusing on levels and, getting the drums separated from the guitars and everything. And by the time they get done, they forget that, this band needs to rock. A lot of the great rock and roll albums were recorded as a band, at least the core tracks were done with the band, because it's hard to really replace that. But anyway, Mott the Hoople had like 5 albums that were kind of not successful before this one came out. And that includes All the Young Dudes, which... that song, that All the Young Dudes is such an iconic song. It might be considered the glam rock anthem, but I don't think you heard it that much till maybe the late 70s, because I remember hearing it, and I listened to a lot of music. I remember hearing it in the late 70s, and it was not that well known. I think it became more well known in the 80s. I remember, they played that, then I saw Ian Hunter, and everybody responded, but it was like a 7 or 8 year old song by then. My favorite Mott the Hoople song is on this album, which is Saturday Gigs, which I think was going to be released as a single. I guess it was released as a single, and on this album, and it's kind of their autobiography as a band, and it's also, to me, even more of a glam rock anthem than All the Young Dudes, which is a David Bowie song, obviously. But, did you see the platform? Did you see the suits and the platform boots? It's kind of got that bittersweet feeling, it was a great time, but we're done, and it was done, right as the band was breaking up or going their separate ways. And it's a sad song, but it's a strong song, but there's a kind of sadness and a strength to it at the same time. And it's also a time capsule. 69 was Cheapo Wine. Would say, have a good time, what's your sign? Float up to the roundhouse, just kind of a dream, Saturday, there were kids, float up to the roundhouse on a Sunday afternoon. 70 was a jamboree, we were the dudes and the dudes were we. Take the Mick off the top of the Pops. We play better than they do. That's the Stones. Because the Mott the Hoople was kind of like a Stones type band, I guess I would say. They kind of occupied a similar space. Did you see the suits and the platform boots? They were always colorful characters. That was one thing about their costumes. That's why I'm wearing my sunglasses in honor of Ian Hunter. See, it'd be midnight, and he'd always have those sunglasses on. And he also had that long kind of perm. I don't know if they were perm, but those long curly locks. And I used to, when I was about 17 or 18, I was always trying to grow my hair long. And it never looked really good, by the way. Some of those guys with long hair, I don't know what they do, but I could never pull it off. Among other fashion faux pas I've committed in my life. But I was trying to grow this long hair. My dad was always didn't like it. But my sister was always kind of, trying to help me, And so one day my sister and I were talking, and we concocted the idea that she should give me a perm, and I was thinking, well, I'll look kind of like Ian Hunter and Mott the Hoople if I have longer hair and then this perm. So I think I was probably 18 or 19. So my sister got out, I don't know, she might have gone to the drugstore, but she got all the stuff for a perm. She put the curlers in my hair and all these chemicals in my hair, and I had to sit there for a while with the towel around my neck. And then she took it off, and sure enough, I had these kind of Ian Hunter curls. And I remember my dad came in the bathroom when my sister was finishing up, and he said, "Son, you look just like Louis the 14th." It was a sort of a humorous remark, but I think I decided not too long after that I didn't want to look either like Ian Hunter or Louis the 14th, as cool as both those people are. So, but but they were definitely a fashion type band. Glam rock. That's kind of like Bowie. The Stones were a glam rock band. Rod Stewart. I think glam rock's more of a style and an aesthetic and a attitude than it was really any particular style of music. The Guess Who used to have that great song Glamour Boy, which I don't think you've heard anymore. I think that was a Burton Cummings era song where I don't know if Randy Bachman was involved with that, but there's a lot of good glam rock. And I think the glam rock influence could be seen in bands even like Aerosmith back then. Well, I don't know if you'd call them a glam rock band, but I don't know if you'd call Led Zeppelin a glam rock band, but they all kind of had that kind of 70s countercultural, and yet in a weird sort of way, high fashion sensibility. Very cool. Great band. The other Mott the Hoople album I have is Mott the Hoople Live. This is another album I picked up. This is from their last tour, which I think is considered a great tour, and yet it was it was kind of like Saturday Gigs. They did this great tour, and yet they knew during the tour they were breaking up. So it was kind of a tour that never really had a end game other than they played some shows, but the tour got great reviews, and this is a great album. And you can YouTube, at least some of this is on YouTube. But like you listen to All the Way from Memphis on this album, and you can hear the heavy rock of it. And like I said, that's a song that makes you realize maybe why people say they were kind of like an early version of punk rock, which I never got. But if you listen to a live album, you can kind of start to sense it. And you listen to All the Way from Memphis on the studio version, like on this Greatest Hits album, and then you listen to it live, it's heavy. It's still got that rock and roll boogie to it, but it's heavy. The guitars are just like down, down, down. It's just driving guitars. Mick Rouse was replaced on the guitar by a guy named Ariel Bender, I think, whose real name is Luther Grosvenor. And he was actually in a band, I hope I got that right. He was actually in a band called Spooky Tooth. And I know a little bit about Spooky Tooth because we used to listen to some Spooky Tooth in my youth. And the one Spooky Tooth song I remember really liking was their cover of I Am the Walrus by the Beatles, which was just a really, really heavy version of the Beatles song. I'm the Walrus is kind of a heavy song to begin with. But, that was kind of like Zeppelin or something where they would take these songs that might have been done more quietly, like Vanilla Fudge even maybe, and do them really heavy. A lot of great organ. But Luther Grosvenor was who's Ariel Bender in Mott the Hoople. He was called Ariel Bender. Was in Spooky Tooth, which was a great band, and then joined Mott the Hoople and played as Ariel Bender. And I think he's still in the band, if I'm not mistaken. Mick Rouse was their guitar player, and he went and joined Bad Company. In fact, Mick Rouse had that song, Can't Get Enough, which was going to be a Mott the Hoople song. And when Mick Rouse left the band, he took it over to Bad Company. And, of course, Paul Rodgers sang it, and it's an all-time classic. But that was going to be a Mott the Hoople song. And the other song off that wonderful first Bad Company album Every song on that album is so good. It's got, and Mick Ralphs was fresh out of Mott the Hoople when they did that. That's got to be one of the best first albums ever. But the other song that was actually Mott the Hoople song is "Ready for Love," which was another Mick Ralphs song. So Mick Ralphs is a great guitar player, and he's another one of those guitar players that never was like shredding, like real fast slashing riffs, whatever shredding was in the early '70s. And a lot of glam rock, I would say, they almost wouldn't want that kind of guitar, but that real kind of effective rock guitar playing. Mick Rouse was just great, and he took it out of Mott the Hoople and went into Bad Company. Of course, Bad Company was a great band. I always thought Bad Company's first album was one of the best albums maybe ever. Definitely one of the first best debut albums. Then Straight Shooter's a good album. I always thought they kind of had diminishing returns. It's hard to, when you do something that great right out of the gate, it's kind of hard to top it. But in the meantime, you have Mott the Hoople, and I think I've got all the young dudes back there. But I always, whenever I hear this, among the great music, I always think of that friend and that great summer. I guess I was around 14 or 15 over at his house, relatively unsupervised. And we would listen to all his older brother's albums. And this was the one, and he made me that cassette. And he handed me that cassette, and I listened to it that night, and I've been a Mott the Hoople fan ever since. And some of you might know a little bit more about the lineups of the band and everything, but I guarantee there aren't too many people out there that the songs I know that like them better than I do. Mott the Hoople was a super duper good band. Boogie, rock, ballads. Saturday Gigs is a ballad. Just they were a good rock and roll band. Glam rock, maybe in some weird way that I don't quite get, and yet I do kind of understand as well. A forerunner of punk rock. Mott the Hoople, and if you haven't heard much of them, listen to them. And I recommend listening to Alice, Marionettes. There's where you might hear, if people were going to say Ian Hunter couldn't sing, Marionettes is kind of one of those songs where some people would say his voice isn't good, but once you listen to it a couple times, you realize it's perfect for the song. The golden age of rock and roll. Born late 58. But my personal favorite is Saturday Gigs. That's just a great song. It's another one of those what-if songs, like Harmony, Elton John. It's one of the best Elton John songs. It was never released as a single. Silver Springs was left off Rumors. It's one of the best Fleetwood Mac songs. And I feel like Saturday Gigs is kind of like that. It was sort of just something they did right at the end of the band, and it got tossed on that Greatest Hits record. I think they might have released it as a single, but it's mostly on that Greatest Hits record. It was kind of just almost a little epitaph to the band, and it's my favorite song they ever did. It might be one of my all-time favorite songs of this period and that style of music. Saturday Gigs is just a testimony to what a great band they truly were. And that's kind of a ballad, mid-tempo ballad, but then you listen to some of their, like Alice or Golden Age of Rock and Roll. They were a rocker. They rocked. And they boogied. Boogie. There's nothing wrong with boogie, That's another thing about music today, boogie rock, but rock was boogie. It wasn't all just blues and heavy, songs about mythology or, boogie rock, and Mott the Hoople did some pretty damn good boogie stuff too, Thank you. God bless you.